We have James Hanisch with us here discussing his new book, which is bound to become a bestseller, despite himself. Tell us about the book, James.
Well, Father, as we said, the point of the book is that only Our Lady can get us out of the mess that we're in here, and we began to discuss in that last little episode about exactly what kind of a mess we're in. On July 17th of 2014, Malaysian civilian air flight was shot down out of the sky.
Shot down. It wasn't an accident or something like that.
Exactly. It was definitely shot down. And we got a sort of canned, ready-made explanation of how this had happened out of the Ukraine government, the United States officials. By that I mean President Obama, Secretary of State Kerry, and the UK Prime Minister Cameron. They all chimed in and said, you know, this is, in Cameron's words, a disaster made in Moscow. President Obama indicted the Russian involvement. Kerry said that, you know, this is, Russia is arming and training these people who have done this. So we got one side of the story. Russia came back and very
calmly, dispassionately, almost.
Exactly, and they pointed that out as well. They said, you know, contrary to the tone of the allegations that are being urged against us, here is a reason and evidence-based response to this whole situation, and they said, you know, I hope we can take the whole conversation in this direction.
Well, certainly, if we're going to, if people are going to come to a conclusion, they have to talk rationally and calmly enough. I mean, I understand passions can get excited, but calmly enough so we say, well, what is the truth? So Russia brought forth the evidence that it couldn't have been the BUK missile, which the Americans and the Ukrainians said it was, because it didn't make, there's no witnesses to such a noise
exactly.
that everyone knows it exists, or to the vapor trail. But beyond that, people might say, now this is out of the news, by the way. People don't talk about this anymore. That was in July. I don't know if you've read anything about this other than you and I or people like us discussing why this was done, but not really. There's no interest in the inquiry into it. For example, the lady that guided the plane in its course from the Kiev control tower while it was over Ukrainian airspace, it was in Ukrainian airspace. She's disappeared apparently, and the inquirers never asked her. They've never reconstructed the airplane. That is the normal course of when any class, whether it's a military, you know, it's a civilian aircraft that comes down. They're trying to find out the truth. What really happened? Why did it come down? Well, they've not. In the normal course of events, they bring the manufacturer. In this case, it would be Boeing. So 777, if I recall, they would be on the ground the next day and looking at the pieces, and among others, they weren't even invited. They weren't there. They put together the plane, the pieces all together as best they can to sort of say, okay, well, we're missing something here, or this is how, and say where it landed and try and reconstruct what happened in those final fatal moments.
But that wasn't done in this case. It just seems as if there was no real interest in discovering or publicizing the real causes of the disaster. For instance, when the Dutch Safety Board did publish its preliminary report, it was just a cloud of ambiguous language. Spoke about the hull being penetrated by high-energy objects.
Nobody talks about high-energy objects. I mean, they're talking about bullets or missiles.
Exactly. What in the world is this, and what's the point of hiding your assessment behind this kind of language?
Well, and the language is, as one commentator pointed out, he's actually an airline pilot of 30 years, says it allows both sides to continue to accuse the other side instead of saying really what took place.
Yes.
And, of course, all those passages in there that you know, he says, you know, on the black box is recorded, you know, in a time of emergency like this, all sorts of things would be said. The control tower voice would be picked up. None of that's in the transcript of this black box.
Exactly.
And yet the black box was the Malaysian. First of all, it was the people the people being accused of bringing down the plane are the very people who found the black box and gave it intact to the Malaysian authorities, the owners of the airplane.
Yes, yes.
And they said it was intact, but they turned it over to the Dutch Safety Board because most of the passengers on that plane were Dutch, and you know, a lot of people don't know there were 80 children on that plane.
Yes, yes. So as you say, the story has essentially fallen out of the media, and what can we say except that it has served its purpose and has now been set aside, and the purpose is very sinister. What has been the effect of all this? It has brought us much, much closer to war. It has served as the reason for imposing more sanctions against Russia and militarizing Russia's borders with NATO forces, and feeding this propagandistic idea in people's minds that Putin is a devil who's bent on, reestablishing the Soviet empire, whereas in fact it seems to be United States aggression that's behind this from beginning to end.
Well, in fact, Ukraine is in a particularly strategic position even before all these things took place. But we must remember that it was Victoria Nuland, who was the Assistant Secretary of State, who admitted on tape that the United States government has spent $5 billion. That's a lot of money, $5 billion, on destabilizing the Ukrainian government so they could put it in their own person.
Yes.
And so that's why the lack of trust by the eastern Ukrainians. That's why they're fighting for their own, what they consider fighting for their own homelands, because the new government put in there by the United States government is anti that section of Ukraine, at least in their perception of it.
Murderously so.
Yeah, yeah.
They're killing them.
Yeah. Oh, and in fact, there was a fire that was set, and how many people burnt there? And all they were doing is signing a petition to have a federal form of government, so they could have some local, local autonomy. And we have federal form of government in the United States and Canada and Switzerland. They want to have the same kind of form of government, and they're signing a petition when they got burnt to death.
That building was burned. The police stood by. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible.
And that's this year also, May of this year.
Yes. And so now, even more recently, since the time of this writing, on December 18th, President Obama signed a bill that has gone almost unanimously through both houses of Congress, the Ukraine Freedom Support Act, which is a Orwellian title for this bill. It authorizes more sanctions, and worst of all, it essentially gives the Poroshenko government a green light to proceed with more hostilities against eastern Ukrainians, and explicitly President Obama to start a process of military confrontation with Russia without any further congressional approval. So we are on the verge of real military aggression. The thing is, it's not going to proceed slowly, and Russia is not going to allow these border states, former satellite states, to become militarized by NATO. It can't possibly afford to do that, and they're not going to wait to see it happen.
And that's in fact, but was it not that, I think, was it Bush or Reagan or whoever was in 1990 agreed to not bring NATO up to Russia's borders?
Exactly.
But that's exactly what they've done.
Yes.
And so, and of course, there's this doctrine in the PNAC, the Plan for a New American Century, which is to, in fact, circle Russia and China militarily to quote unquote contain them.
Yes.
And so we have now, but they're not doing it in the words of the PNAC. They're doing it in the words of correcting Russia because they're the bad guys. But in fact, what your book points out and all the evidence points to is that it's really the West that's been the aggressor in this, and then blaming Russia for their own aggression.
Yes, and then when you have control of the media, anything works as a reason, as a justification for even the most baseless actions. That's something that Hitler himself spoke about in a sinister way. He told his generals a week before his invasion of Poland, he said, "I will supply a casus belli. I'll supply a
cause for war."
Yes, a propagandistic excuse for this push that we're going to make. And he said, its plausibility will not matter. By the time people have a chance to rise up and question this, it'll be over. It's going to serve for the moment. And then he said, no one's going to question the victor to ask if he told the truth. So it's a horrible situation. And that's
so now in your book, you also point out that this is something that the United States official documents have shown, that the U.S. military have proposed this to President Kennedy in the Operation Northwoods, and also that the U.S. Congress in 2007 sanctioned or censured President Bush for lying to the people about the attack in Iraq. Do I have that correct? Yeah.
Yes, that's right, Father. In 1962, General Leimnitzer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, formally presented President Kennedy with a plan for accomplishing his goals toward a regime change in Cuba. And it's a shocking thing. This is outside the box for most Americans, but it's documented. These documents were released. They were declassified in 1997, and you can read them in the National Security Archives. It's a 12-page document. Basically, General Leimnitzer the whole Joint Chiefs of Staff is proposing that CIA agents and other paid operatives of the United States would carry out terrorist acts in U.S. cities, targeting, killing U.S. citizens, also military installations, even in Washington, D.C., but mainly in Florida, supplying evidence as if this had been done by Cuba, until the people would then be ready to say, okay, send the military, let's solve this Cuba problem.
So in other words, for the basis for starting a war with Cuba, having this quote-unquote evidence, which they themselves would be supplying,
exactly,
pretending it was Fidel doing it, when in fact it was the U.S. government. But at least Kennedy, what happened, when they proposed this to him, what did he say?
He said, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
No. But he had his problems, but he was truly an extraordinary man, and I think he must have known that his life was on the line for the position that he ended up taking. There were monetary issues as well, so he went against the establishment in deep, dangerous ways, and I don't think it could have been a big surprise to him, what danger he was in. So I believe he's a hero for us. But we have not had heroic presidents, I'm afraid, more recently.
Yeah.
And so it should not come as it should not be unbelievable that governments would be acting as the enemy of their citizens.
In order to achieve their own hidden agenda.
Exactly. I believe that's what's going on.
And your book makes we only have a few minutes to talk about it, but your book makes that case, I think, very, very well. And I think I urge everyone to read the book. But of course, there's a solution, which is Our Lady of Fatima, and I've been saying that for years. Of course, you have also, but it's explained even better, I think, in this book, in the light of where we are today.
I hope that this book will do some good, because we're about out of time, and as I said, we have an answer. It's not that these things are completely out of control. Our Lady can control these things, and she's just waiting on us. She's told us what to do. We can do it.
And we can do it. We're out of time on this program, but Our Lady said, only I can help you, and she also said, that entire nations will be annihilated if we don't listen to her in time.
Exactly.
So, and that's what's about to happen if we don't listen. God bless, and we'll talk about this in another program.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you.